So, with Disney's future looking more and more uncertain by the day, I decided to look back at their lineup of movies and reminisce about the legacy this once great studio left on the world, only to come to a realization. I didn't grow up with a lot of Disney movies, and I have not even seen half their catalog. And while I did watch some when I was younger, I was more so a Warner kid. Even then, as an animation fan,
This is unacceptable!
So I decided it was time I right this wrong, and where better to start than the classic era, everything predating the Disney Renaissance. This should be fun! Welp, they certainly do exist. Sorry if you were expecting a walk down memory lane, this may not be the video for you, but if you want to see how a non-nostalgic person would rank these, then buckle up because this will be a wild ride. Maybe it's because I didn't grow up with them, but I honestly fail to see the appeal a lot of these movies have outside of nostalgia. But to be fair, I do appreciate how revolutionary many of these movies were. And I'm glad that they exist because without them, who knows what animation would look like if Disney did not exist. But that doesn't stop them from being products of a bygone era that, for better or worse, will never happen again. So, since I watched all these movies, I think it's time to rank them. Also, quick side note, I'm not going to talk about the outdated content unless it actually affected my enjoyment of a specific movie. I just don't see the point in applying today's standards to movies that are almost 100 years old. Is that okay? Okay, let us begin.
Boo! You stink!
You know, I knew there were going to be a couple movies on here that I wouldn't like. But my God, I cannot begin to express the sheer soul-sucking awfulness that was The Sword in the Stone. Now, by hearing that title, one would expect this movie to be about King Arthur pulling the sword from the stone and having to deal with being king, right?
No!
The plot is about Arthur needing an advanced education, so Merlin spends the entire movie teaching him. So, by that basic premise, it's about Arthur becoming smart enough so he can pull the sword from the stone, right?
No!
The titular sword is only brought up twice in the movie, once in the beginning, and only comes back in the ending. The rest of the movie is just Arthur and Merlin messing around as random animals on disjointed, boring adventures, learning very basic and incredibly vague lessons. And these take up so much time, I completely forgot that this was even an adaptation of the King Arthur story to begin with. And none of these misadventures are fun or charming. They're tedious. They're dull. They're just padding used to extend the runtime because, God forbid, we give any focus to Arthur becoming worthy to pull the sword from the stone in this movie called The Sword in the Stone. And what does anything they do in these segments have to do with the sword anyway? What does fighting a pike and emotionally scarring a squirrel have to do with Arthur pulling the sword? Merlin feels like a prototype version of Robin Williams' Genie, but worse in every way. He's an authoritarian figure who's constantly spouting about, you'll get nowhere in life without an education, you need an education or you won't add up to anything, and yet nothing he teaches Arthur ever plays into him pulling Excalibur from that rock. Merlin's constant, annoying, preachy lectures about education literally did nothing for this kid. What was the point of all of this? And that's on top of Arthur being bland and forgettable. Same with his brother and father, bland and forgettable. I liked the owl, but I don't remember anything about him. And yes, Madam Mim was great, but even then, she's just thrown in at the last minute. And while I do like the wizard duel, it's just another detour in a movie filled with them. And it was at this point I was just telling myself, please let this movie be over soon. Oh, and the best part of all of this? Arthur is afraid that he won't be a good king, and all Merlin says is,
"Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy now."
And then the movie ends. What was achieved here? How did that reassure Arthur? Merlin can time travel, but Arthur can't. Who thought this was a good idea? This movie makes The Mighty Kong look like the Peter Jackson remake and makes Ultimate Avengers 2 look like Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I have not loathed something this much since Cross Ange, which, may I remind you, is the worst thing I have ever seen. Say what you will about Quest for Camelot. At least it has some good songs, some funny jokes, and actually dedicates time to developing its story. This, on the other hand, this is worthless. It's a truly worthless experience, and it's one I hope I never have to see again in a long, long time.
Well, what do you think?
Congratulations, Borax. You've discovered a cure for insomnia.
If I'm being honest, I don't get the hype around Fantasia. I can appreciate how avant-garde it is and how much of a risk it was at the time to make. And it's definitely got more passion and effort put into it than The Sword in the Stone ever did. But I'm sorry, this movie is just boring. It's boring, tedious, and way too long. And it's just mostly watching pretty visuals dance on screen with little to no story. Even the segments that do have somewhat of a story are still monotonous to watch. It's impressively made, and Sorcerer's Apprentice and Bald Mountain definitely deserve the hype they get. But only liking 2 shorts out of the 8 offered does not make for a good viewing experience. I honestly think I would enjoy these segments more if they were just released on their own. But unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. Seriously, I cannot explain just how tedious this movie is. Ugh. I'll keep it short because I don't know what else to say. I'm glad I watched this movie for some of the segments, but you would have to pay me to even consider watching this beast in its entirety a second time. And if I ever do, I'll probably just skip to The Sorcerer's Apprentice and maybe Bald Mountain. And I recommend you do the same. Also, look at this bush in Pastoral Symphony. Why does no one bring this up?
Didn't make sense not to live for fun.
So, some context is needed. During World War II, due to budgets being tight and animators being drafted, Disney resorted to making package films, cheaply produced anthologies consisting of multiple shorts instead of just one continuous story. Think of these as like pseudo follow-ups to Fantasia, but with less effort and resources at their disposal. And while certain shorts from these package films have become iconic in their own right, the films themselves have become pretty infamous for being not very good. And I have to agree with the Tomato Tomba guy. The worst of these package films is undoubtedly Fun and Fancy Free, a movie named after an unused Pinocchio song that consists of Jiminy Cricket doing random things, the most uncomfortable birthday party ever, and 2 shorts, Bongo the Bear and Mickey and the Beanstalk. The Bongo short is just boring, generic, and far too long. It's about an escaped circus bear living in the woods finding true love and having to fight another bear to win her affection, complete with a song about how you should strike the ones you love to let them know just how much you love them. Yep. Mickey and the Beanstalk, on the other hand, is pretty fun, and it's cool to see where that thin bread and crazy Donald meme came from. Too bad these annoying ventriloquist puppets keep interrupting it with unfunny quips and banter. They're basically like Crow and Tom Servo, but without any of the chemistry or writing that made them work. I think I should probably mention this. What makes this package film unique amongst the others is that before the war started, both of these shorts were originally planned to be full feature-length movies in of themselves, but were later cut down to save on costs. And while I can sort of see how the latter could work in a feature-length format, I'm honestly glad we never got the full 90-minute version of Bongo. It already could barely fill up 40 minutes, and even then, that's really pushing it. But I guess it at least had some pretty looking visuals, kind of like another movie on this list. But to be fair, I do think Jiminy is a lot better here than in Pinocchio. And I actually enjoyed his scenes quite a bit. Until they dropped Jiminy as a framing device for the aforementioned birthday party. Why? Why have Jiminy if you're just going to drop him like that? Look, I'm grasping at straws at this point. Can we just move on to the next one already?
Mario, you are going to
Mexico!
Time for some more history. During the early days of World War II, Disney, due to their characters being extremely popular there at the time, were sent to South America to be ambassadors of sorts, to sway public interest into becoming allies with the US. The results? 2 package films specifically made to act as propaganda to both celebrate the cultures and traditions of the South American continent, while also persuading them to become allies. This is the second of those 2 package films. And honestly, if Fantasia was bad in a boring sense, then this movie is bad in an annoying sense. I mean, I was getting into it at first, with the gimmick of Donald being sent gifts from his friends across the world. And there were a few segments I thought were perfectly charming. I liked the joke with Panchito continuously singing and Donald and Jose trying to shut him up, and my favorite part was where we learned about Christmas traditions in Mexico. But after that, the segments just become far too drawn out, and you're just left waiting for it to end and move on to the next one. And Donald being obsessed with these human ladies is funny at first, but that also quickly becomes annoying as well when he stops swooning for them and starts chasing them. Spoilers for later on in the list, but Saludos Amigos, the predecessor to this, is pretty fun, and I felt like I learned quite a lot about their culture from watching it. Unlike Saludos Amigos, I got nothing from this, and I think that's why my favorite part was the Christmas segment, because I was actually learning something about Panchito's culture like what the last film sought to do. While the rest of this movie is just noise, noise, noise. This is the only movie on the list I can safely say overstayed its welcome. And yet it's still better than anything else below it because, I don't know, it wasn't boring.
Ooh, Rarity, your glass slipper! Now your prince is sure to find you!
I'm not going to beat around the bush. Cinderella's kind of ass! Not gonna lie. So, you think this movie will be about Cinderella and her hopes of one day escaping her miserable life for a better one, right?
No!
Instead, it goes the route of The Sword in the Stone, and basically just meanders for 2/3 of the film, choosing to focus on everything else but the titular character. And while Cinderella is a lot more central to the story than Excalibur was in its movie, it still dedicates far too much screen time to the side characters and what they're doing, instead of the characters who actually need it. And because of this, the prince is stupidly one note, and Cinderella is really underdeveloped. And what's worse is that they will actively gloss over a lot of important stuff just so we can focus more on the Diet Tom and Jerry shenanigans going on. Like Cinderella's past and her upbringing underneath Lady Tremaine. This wouldn't be an issue if I found these peeps charming, but I just don't. Stick my head on a pike if you want. I'm going to say it. The mice are annoying, and their scenes feel more like padding to stretch out the runtime than they do anything else. And holy macaroni are their voices annoying. And when you add all of this up, the first 2/3 of this movie is just a slog to sit through. I'm pretty sure sitting in a tar pit is more entertaining than watching anything to do with these mice. But to be fair, it does pick up in the third act and becomes a lot more suspenseful. Despite being one of the weaker Disney princesses, I still felt Cinderella's plight. The king was occasionally funny, and Lady Tremaine, while not the best Disney villain, is without a doubt a very malicious character you just love to hate. But I think my favorite part would have to be the fairy godmother. She's charming, funny, and everything the mice are not. I just wish she had more screen time. To simply put it, there are things I like in this movie. It's ultimately the victim of bad prioritization.
Your Majesty, Ganon and his minions have seized
the Black Cauldron.
The Black Cauldron was kind of mediocre, if I'm being honest. I like the gothic aesthetic and musical score, and I like the witches enough, but once you remove that, you're just left with this very basic fantasy adventure about getting to this magical MacGuffin pot before the evil bad guy gets to it first. To be honest, I was enjoying it initially, with it being about this pig who can see the future and it being the key to finding the Black Cauldron. That's a fun idea. But that plotline is dropped almost as quickly as it came and is never mentioned again. So, thank you for wasting our time with a mostly useless plot point, I guess. But I think the worst part of this movie is our hero. He is this annoying kid who prattles about wanting to be a great hero someday, but he really doesn't do anything to show that he's accomplished this, or even getting closer to becoming that hero. I get it, his story is about him letting go of his childish fantasies and making smarter choices. But that doesn't change how much of an obnoxious little brat this guy is. But if we're talking about annoying characters, he is only second to Gurgi. He is probably the most obnoxious character in any Disney film, be it his unfunny attempt at comedy or, his voice.
Oh, poor miserable Gurgi deserves fierce smackings and whackings on his poor tender head.
Speaking of which, let's get to what everyone talks about regarding this movie. The Horned King. I have mixed feelings about this guy. On the surface, he's a cool and cruel character, and undoubtedly one of Disney's scariest antagonists. But when you look a little deeper, he's just any generic fantasy villain you can think of, and there's nothing that makes him particularly memorable outside of his design. It's clear they wanted to make a villain that stood alongside the greats like Maleficent, but I'm sorry, he just doesn't. I know it's widely considered an underrated classic, and I'm glad other people enjoy it, but I don't think I'm going to have this be a part of my own personal collection anytime soon. But hey, it's still a better fantasy movie than The Sword in the Stone. Take that as you will.
Hello, Ed boys. Many doors, yes? Too much for couch potato Ed boys like yourself.
Alice in Wonderland is in the same boat as Fantasia. I just don't get the hype around it. I mean, it does start off charming enough, and I was interested in seeing what weird and surreal things I would see next. The Cheshire Cat was entertaining with his creative visuals. I like the Queen of Hearts for her short temper. It easily has some of the best animation in any of the pre-Renaissance Disney movies. And the Walrus in The Carpenter is easily my favorite part. But in the end, it's just another movie where it feels like it's waving a bunch of pretty images around and saying, look at it, look at it, look at it. I know it's not supposed to have much of a story, as it's more so an excuse to move from one place to another and meet the people in Wonderland. And as fun as it was, just like Alice, I got tired of the randomness pretty quickly. And I just found most of these characters to be annoying or just straight up dicks. I get that's the point of her journey, that without reason there would only be endless chaos, but I was just ready for it to be over by the time we got to the Queen of Hearts. And when it's over, it just kind of ends, pretty abruptly even. I should mention this, many of the people who made this movie, including Walt Disney himself, were unhappy with the final result, and it only found popularity in the 1970s for obvious reasons. And regarding both, I can easily see why. I honestly feel kind of bad for not liking this movie because it is one of the most timeless films out of all the originals. If you enjoy this movie, more power to you. But for me, I'm probably just going to rewatch Volume 9 of Ruby long before rewatching this. Make Mine Music is definitely a step up from the Three Caballeros, but at the same time, it really wasn't that high of a bar to clear. It had a few creative and fun shorts like The Operatic Whale and Peter and the Wolf, but due to its nature as a disjointed package film, its shorts have very little connective tissue outside of music. The more abstract shorts like Blue Bayou were extremely boring, and yeah, I don't really have much else to say. Make Mine Music is just an overall mixed bag. Moving on.
Hey, I can fly!
Dumbo is a movie that exists. Welp, that's all I have to say.
Your mother is dead!
Okay, being serious now, it does a good job at making you sympathize with Dumbo. The pink elephant scene may be pointless, but it's easily the most fun part of the movie. It has a good message about making what makes you different your strongest attribute, and Timothy is just Jiminy Cricket but better in every way. He's supportive, dedicated, he's on duty at all times, he'll stand up for Dumbo, and can we just agree Jiminy sucks? Other than that, the movie feels aimless until the last 10 minutes or so, as we just follow Dumbo being bullied and rejected for 90 minutes, until he miraculously and out of nowhere learns to fly. And while I said I wouldn't talk about the racist content depicted in here, I will be honest, this is the only movie that actually made me cringe when seeing it. All in all, it's a pretty mundane movie that relies on playing to your heartstrings more than storytelling. All in all, a much better movie than half of the films on this list.
Should have taken the shot, fat ass.
Second verse, same as the first. But in this case, I can see why people like Bambi. It's just a beautiful movie that captures the majesty of nature. The animation and soundtrack complement each other, and I think it captures the idea of the circle of life really nicely. Wait, hold on. I like the owl. The final act is where the movie actually gets entertaining. I even felt my toes curl in suspense when watching it. Yeah, that's about it. Other than those positives, the movie tries way too hard to be whimsical and cutesy, and while I can appreciate a non-linear story that follows the life of our main character from birth to adulthood, it comes at the cost of nothing really happening throughout the runtime. I also wish I could say I cried at Bambi's mom dying, especially since I used to say it was one of the saddest moments in Disney history. But in hindsight, we know so little about her, and with how often it's talked about, it ended up being just another thing that happens in the movie. We don't even spend time on how this affected Bambi, as we immediately cut to more cutesy, colorful antics. In the end, I think I'd use this movie as background noise before actually rewatching it again.
What if we made the 7 dwarves 7 feet tall?
I mean, how can I hate Snow White? Okay, I don't think it's a masterpiece, but given that it's the first animated movie ever made, and it set the groundwork for all other animated movies to come, it's definitely a movie I respect more than I do enjoy. Snow White, while the most basic of the Disney princesses, is still a sweetheart that we, the audience, can still root for. And for being nearly 100 years old at this point, I'm surprised just how well the animation holds up after all this time. But let's be honest, we don't watch this movie for Snow White. We're here for the dwarves, because they are the ones who steal the show. Of course, just because you're the first doesn't make you the best. For example, the prince is ridiculously flat and bland. I know they wanted to do more with him but couldn't because of budgetary reasons, but I think they could have at least cut down the screen time given to the dwarves and reallocate it to him. And the conflict doesn't start until around the last 20 minutes or so, and the rest of the movie is just watching characters sing and bounce and dance and... Have I mentioned that I believe it was movies like this that helped cement the stigma of animation being for kids? Also, why doesn't the evil queen just make Snow White drink the ugly potion? That seems like a better idea than just turning herself ugly. I get that's the point, as she's becoming how she sees herself, but come on. Also, you might want to brush your teeth. That's how you get diseases. But in all seriousness, I prefer this movie over Cinderella because, while I do think both movies should have given more focus to certain parts over others, it at least focuses on what it promised: Snow White and the 7 Dwarves. To summarize, it's a very charming, albeit basic movie that has stood the test of time in many areas, and I can't wait to see how Disney bastardizes it in the live-action remake. Also, my brother actually came in while I was recording to interject his thoughts on Snow White, so I'll play that moment here. You can skip to this timestamp to get back to the ranking. Yes?
I heard you talking.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking how it was the first animated movie ever made.
Yeah.
Well, reminded me. Part of it is just that the wow factor has disappeared. What it was at one point is it was big. It was impressive. It was amazing. A spectacle movie, if you would.
Mm-hmm.
But now that it's been 100 years.
Almost. It goes public domain in 10.
I see. But now that it's so old, it's just not that impressive anymore. The first wheel that Ooga chipped out of a rock was a big milestone in history. It was still shit. And even though it's historically important, that's all that's left to it. Nobody would ever use Ooga's stone wheel for anything anymore.
Fair point. Mind if I use that in the video?
Sure.
Cool.
I just wanted to interject since I could hear you talking.
Okay, thank you.
Pull the trigger, Piglet.
The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. It's a charming, wholesome, fun little slice of life movie that I actually really did enjoy. Tigger's really fun and is easily the best part of the movie. The Heffalumps and Woozles scene is a delight. The interactions between the narrator and the characters are cute. And I do really like the ending. That's really all I have to say. It's just Winnie the Pooh. It went on a little too long for my liking, but at the end of the day, much like the former, it's a charming, albeit basic movie that I think has stood the test of time really well.
It is time!
Yet another package film, and thankfully, these things keep getting better. If I'm being honest, the Bumblebee and Tree shorts were probably my favorite parts. Johnny Appleseed was a fun retelling of the iconic American legend and handled the idea of passing on really well. The Tugboat and Winter shorts are just kind of whatever. The Saludos Amigos segment was annoying and went on a little too long. And that's basically it. But at least with this compilation, I can say it was cute. When I initially watched Lady and the Tramp, I really liked it. But when I started thinking about it and listened to what other people thought, yeah, this movie's kind of lame. Don't get me wrong, there are parts of this movie I like. It's a very charming movie with beautiful animation. I really liked the spaghetti scene, and while it's another movie you're just supposed to vibe with, I liked this movie more than the others. Well, at least the ones below it. But it also has a lot of flaws to balance out the good it has. Ignoring one of the more obvious points of contention, we've got the fake-out death. Lady and the Tramp don't have much chemistry with each other. Aunt Sarah is a really lame villain. The rat, while not out of nowhere like most people think, is just a conflict forcefully thrown into the movie, and in the end, nothing much really happens. I don't know. I enjoyed movies like Minuscule, but with these, maybe they're just not made for me. Speaking of which...
Oh, Little John!
Second verse, same as the first. Robin Hood is a very laid-back and fun movie. I like Prince John and how he goes from this pathetic wimp to a legitimate threat by the end. I like the music, the sheriff is a sleazeball and is honestly a better villain than Prince John. The whole jailbreak and robbery scene is surprisingly suspenseful, but much like Lady and the Tramp, it's got a lot of flaws that balances out the good stuff. There's the obviously recycled animation. Robin Hood and Maid Marian are probably the least interesting couple in any of these movies, and the ending is just dumb. Like, King Richard returns out of nowhere and everything is just magically resolved. I'll just say it, the alternate ending is a lot better than the actual ending. I don't know. I think my enjoyment of this movie depends on what mood I'm in. But it's better than Lady and the Tramp because stuff actually happens in it. I'll give it that.
Oh no! A tiger! Help! Help!
Here's another movie that you're supposed to vibe to that I also didn't like as much as I wanted to. But this time around, I liked it a little bit more. I like Ka and how much fun they have with how long he is. I like Baloo and the chemistry he has with Bagheera. I like the message about growing up and doing what you don't want to do, but what needs to be done. I Wanna Be Like You is a really fun song, and even though he really is just a less intimidating version of Scar, Shere Khan is still a good villain, all things considered. But let's be real, the real showstopper in this movie is bare necessities. I caught myself grinning like an idiot when this song came on. But it's also just another movie with no real story and just goes from one location to another. And aside from these two, none of the characters are particularly memorable. Not to mention, we've got another fake-out death, and it forces a love interest for Mowgli at the last minute, just so he can ditch his loyal friends who risked their lives multiple times to save him, just to be with this random girl he just met. I never knew Mowgli was such a shallow hole. In the end, this movie, like the last one, is the kind where I need to be in the right mood to enjoy.
Who are you?
I am the horseless headsman.
I think you mean the headless horseman.
And the award for the oddest package film goes to... Yeah, I don't think I need to explain just how weird it is to put The Wind in the Willows and Sleepy Hollow back to back. One is a lighthearted romp like what you would typically expect from Disney, while the other has The Headless Horseman. But after some thinking, I can kind of see why they would, on the basis of how similar the titular characters are. Both are eccentric individuals with high societal standings in their communities. Mr. Toad is a well-meaning but reckless person that a lot of people don't respect, while Ichabod Crane is a greedy man who exploits the fact everyone likes him to his own advantage. They're kind of like mirror opposites of each other. But getting to the segments themselves, The Wind in the Willows is a charming enough story with plenty of fun to be had, but let's be honest, Sleepy Hollow is easily the best part. It's atmospheric, the antics are actually funny, it has great music, the Headless Horseman stuff is awesome and horrifying, but if I'm being honest, I found Mr. Toad kind of annoying. His recklessness and constant obsessions get old and tiring, and he doesn't learn anything by the end. I know Ichabod is a more morally corrupt individual, but he was intentionally designed to be unlikable. Mr. Toad was never meant to be, and that makes it worse. Not to mention, I think they could have used the narrators to frame these shorts a lot better than they did. In any case, it's a decent package film, just skip to the Sleepy Hollow segment. Nothing much else to say.
You thought your first kiss would be JoJo, but it was I, Dio!
Okay, I want you to think about this for a moment. We're in the top 10 of this list of 27 movies, and we're still not past the movies I think are just okay. Let that sink in for a moment. Okay, moving on. To be fair, out of all the pre-Renaissance Disney movies, this is easily the best of the classic era princess movies. I like that the king was a good father and was smart enough to actually take precautions, and I enjoy the camaraderie he has with this other king. I like the fairies and how charming they are, and Aurora and Philip are, while not the deepest characters, leaps and bounds better than other classic princes and princesses from this, well, era. And that final battle was just really fun. But let's be honest, much like the genie, there's only one character that carries this film and is the only reason people remember it. Maleficent. Yeah, I agree, this character is hype. She is easily one of the best Disney villains. Her presence, her pettiness, her lines.
Now shall you deal with me, O Prince, and all the powers of hell!
I can see why people like her. Much like Big Jack Horner, she captures the best aspects of the irredeemable monster villain, which has largely disappeared in recent years. But man, even with that said, the prince and princess are still flat. And the only reason why Maleficent goes through with her evil plans is because it's all the fairies' fault. If they hadn't used their magic for one more day, Maleficent would have never found Aurora. Or, had they never left her alone, she would have probably never pricked her finger. Something even they acknowledge. With that said, it's just another movie I find okay. But for an okay movie, it's a pretty enjoyable one, and I'd take it over stuff like Cinderella or Pocahontas any day.
You're not gonna shoot a puppy, are you, Jack?
Yeah, in the face. Why?
And here's another movie that's just okay, but was pretty fun as well. I really like the sketchy aesthetic of this world they create. It adds a unique personality to it that a lot of other Disney movies don't have. And much like The Jungle Book and Robin Hood, this movie is relatively laid back with some adventure thrown in to balance it out. Horace and Jasper are fun enough and do make for a good added threat, and I like its message about coming together for a common cause. But let's be honest, much like Sleeping Beauty, it's the villain that carries this movie. Cruella de Vil is a really fun villain, intimidating, vile, enjoyably crazy, and is easily the best part of the entire franchise. Once again, she's like Big Jack Horner in the sense that she is an unsympathetic monster, and that's the point of her character. She's just the irredeemable monster that we're supposed to hate, and I love her for that. I just hope they never tried to do something stupid like make her sympathetic or something. But I'll be honest, I could see where the corners were cut, with how I could recognize reused models from Lady and the Tramp, and I agree with the Tamatoa guy, that this would work better as a video game. And let's be honest, outside of what I said, no one would remember this movie exists if it weren't for Cruella. But let's be honest, it's still a step up from the other movies on this list, and is still a fun movie in its own right. I probably just won't go revisit it for a long time.
A cat is not a dog.
Oliver and Company was a movie that I used to watch a lot when I was, 4 years old? But haven't seen since that time. And now that I'm, 25? This was the first time I ever went back to rewatch it. And I hate to say it, the movie was both a lot better than I remembered, but also a lot worse at the same time. Much like Dalmatians, I like the sketchy New York aesthetic, and I like the overall personality the film has. I like the one song Dodger sings. Sykes is a surprisingly good villain and easily has one of the best deaths in the Disney canon. I just wish he was in a better movie. And yeah, the entire climax is just great in general. But to balance that out, the movie is also underdeveloped in many ways as well. We never learn why Fagin borrowed money from Sykes. The music does peak with Why Should I Worry, and all the other songs are just forgettable. And the friendship between Oliver and the girl is just really rushed. Heck, I'll just go further and say all of these characters are underdeveloped and feel one note. Except for Oliver, who feels more like a plot device than an actual character. I guess there could have been worse ways for the classic era of Disney to come to an end, and while I don't have any real nostalgia for this movie, I still enjoyed it despite it being half-baked. I would never call this movie underrated, but it's a movie that's without a doubt underappreciated in many ways.
What are you doing in my swamp?
Much like Oliver and Company, I used to watch The Rescuers quite a bit when I was young, but stopped watching it around that same time. And unfortunately, much like the latter, it didn't hold up on rewatch. I really like the opening as it sets a really nice mood and makes good use of still paintings to tell a story through visuals, and I like the idea of this secret rodent rescue service working in the shadows of our civilization. I liked the music, the organ scene was fun, and so was the final fight. But for every one thing I did like, there was one more I didn't. First off, fun fact. Cruella de Vil was originally planned to be the villain of this movie, but was later scrapped in favor of this lady. And I'm sorry, she's just a watered-down version of Cruella de Vil, and that's all she'll ever be. And while I enjoyed the movie in the beginning, when we got to the bayou, everything slowed down quite a bit, and not much of anything of real note happens at this point. And I'm just going to say it, Bernard and Bianca are forgettable characters. Though I will point this out, this movie is without a doubt canonically connected to Bambi. So there's that. Honestly, this feels like the most average film on the list. Not much else to say.
What does the fox say?
Once again, like the last two movies, I used to watch this one quite a bit when I was younger, then I eventually stopped watching it after a certain age. But, unlike the former, this was a lot better than I remembered. I like its message on how societal expectations and pressures can turn even the best of friends into the worst of enemies. And I was surprisingly invested in whether or not Todd and Copper's friendship would last. I do think the part of them being childhood friends is rushed, and I wish they stuck to their original intent on just killing Chief, since he really doesn't have anything left to do in the film after that. And I do question the logic of releasing a domestic fox into the wild without rehabilitation first. Also, Vixie is so clearly there just to give Todd a love interest for no real reason other than this is a Disney movie and the main character needs love. Other than that, it was a very basic but sweet movie with an ending that was equally bittersweet, but in a good way. I might have to show this movie to my friends sometime, and I can safely say this is indeed an underrated gem. Oh, I'm going to get so much flack for this, but I could care less. Once again, much like the other movies, The Aristocats was also a movie I used to watch quite a bit before growing out of it. And while I did like The Fox and the Hound, with this movie, I had a real blast going back to it. It's a very laid-back and charming movie about a house cat and her kittens trying to get back home with the help of a stray. And I actually really like O'Malley. At first he's just hitting on the Duchess and helps her out to impress them, but as time goes by he comes to genuinely like the whole family. Heck, I actually think the Duchess and O'Malley are my favorite Disney couple. I just like how they avoided every cliche that could arise, and it makes for an honestly refreshing love story about two people who aren't forced onto a journey with one another or are destined to be with each other. They just simply click, and that's it. And when the third act breakup does come, it's not some kind of misunderstanding. It's them understanding both live very different lives, and they part on good terms. And by proxy of this, when he does come back to save them, it doesn't feel forced. And I just really liked a lot of the characters. Edgar is a lovably petty villain whose antics are fun to watch. I really like the two dogs. I like the one song. I mean, it's not perfect. The piano song is probably one of the worst songs in Disney's canon. Some aspects of it are obviously outdated. The animation is not the best and it shows its cheapness at points. And while there's no depth, twists, or turns in this movie, I feel like that was intentional. They just wanted a movie you could vibe with, and by golly, they actually succeeded. I actually vibed with this movie more than the others that tried to do something similar, and I think I might have to rewatch it again sometime soon.
Dear God, Pinocchio, what are you doing?
I must consume your soul to become a real boy.
Psst. Hey, I don't know if you know this, but Pinocchio's a pretty good movie. Let's start with the animation. Right off the bat, this is an immediate improvement over Snow White. Its use of multiple panes gives the world a lot more depth and makes it overall feel more alive. And it's not just the new techniques they applied. The animation on all the characters are some of the best Disney has done. Heck, the animation on Monstro alone is insanely impressive, even by today's standards. Aside from a boost in animation quality, it's also a dark, strange, charming, and whimsical film in of itself that made it a real treat to watch. I enjoyed Honest John and Gideon and thought they were the funniest parts in the entire film. And because Pinocchio was literally born yesterday, anything he does that would be stupid of any other character helps absolve him from looking stupid because he was literally born yesterday. He doesn't know any better. Top that off with a beautiful soundtrack, one of which would become synonymous with Disney as a whole, and you've got a decently entertaining movie. But at the same time, it's not perfect. Jiminy Cricket, because Pinocchio was born yesterday, is given the task of watching over him, and he's honestly really bad at being Pinocchio's conscience. Maybe that stems from him also having to learn to be patient with Pinocchio, but I really can't just shake the feeling that he is a worse version of Timothy Mouse. And then there are moments where I'm just left asking questions like, why didn't Geppetto walk Pinocchio to school? Why was Geppetto looking for Pinocchio out at sea? That last question was something even the remake answered. Regardless, I like this movie. Though, if I'm being honest, my enjoyment for this movie was probably tainted by the fact that my first introduction to it was through Waxinator.
Do what you want, 'cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate.
Out of all the mixed bags on this list, this one is my favorite. I honestly don't know where to start. I know, let's talk about what I like first. Captain Hook is honestly a really fun villain, and he has great chemistry with Smee, and he's especially funny with that crocodile. And I like how Tinkerbell is basically a straight-up psychopath and fully acknowledges it. And overall, it's an incredibly charming and surprisingly exciting movie. I just overall like the adventures they go on. But then we get to the other half I don't like. It's fun to watch Peter in action, but when he's not, he's just being a jerk to Wendy, and he doesn't go through any real development as a character until the end. And then you've got stuff like the Indians. Look, I'm not going to judge a movie older than myself for having this, but all it really does is act as a blemish on what is otherwise one of the most timeless movies of the classic era. But removing all the bad stuff, it basically captures all the best aspects that made Walt's movies so iconic. And that's the best way I can describe it. It's all the best attributes of Walt Disney's works that made them such classics today.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, this was going to rank high up one way or another. What makes The Great Mouse Detective significant is that in this entire roster, this one has the biggest legacy. Because of the surprise success it was both critically and financially, it helped pave the way for what would become the Disney Renaissance. And even though it still has that classic era feel to it, those building blocks are very prominent. Its story, animation, characters, all of it feels like it belongs in the Disney Renaissance more than it does the classic era. And I feel like all of that is represented in the opening, which is easily one of the best starters to a Disney movie. Speaking of which, let's talk about the Great Mouse Detective himself. Basil has such an eccentric yet near crazy personality that it makes you want to see him at work but also not get too close to him at the same time. A truly perfect combo to make him an interesting character. And the whole movie itself, be it in a simple room or above the city, has this grand feel to all of it. And the entire climax is a lot of fun, and despite it being the first time the company used it, the CGI holds up pretty well even to this day. But let's get to what is easily the best part of this movie, Ratigan. He is such a great villain, with how he portrays himself as this elegant individual, but in actuality, he does all he can to hold back his true animalistic tendencies. While also being so full of himself, he designs a death trap set to go off once a record player stops playing. And what is on the record? A song he personally made that does nothing but mock Basil. Mwah! That's just a cherry on top. In all honesty, this feels like the movie that the Rescuers wanted to be. And while I do think this lineup peaked during its twilight years, there is still one movie that I think is the overall better package. Yeah, I know. I'm just as surprised as you are. Saludos Amigos is not only just the best of the package films by a large margin, but I honestly think it's the best pre-Renaissance Disney movie, period. It has the best connective tissue out of all the package films, those being a bunch of shorts made by people sent to South America, all of which take inspiration from many real-world locations and traditions. And I didn't just have a fun time watching this, but I actually felt like I was learning something. And yeah, the shorts were just a lot of fun. The antics of Donald, Jose, Goofy, they were just entertaining. And I liked some of the original shorts they had too. It even had some really cool visuals at point. I asked my main animator, Gabriel, what he thought of the movie since he lives in Brazil. And he says pretty much everything the movie portrays is on point. So yeah, not only does it have his stamp of approval, but it's just a really charming, fun movie, with its short runtime being its greatest strength. Put all this together, and you've got a surprisingly strong movie I'd happily rewatch anytime. And the one movie on this list I can safely give that rare 10 out of 10. I enjoyed it far more than I should have, but hey, with my non-nostalgic views on all these movies, this honestly spoke to me the most. So, all in all, this was a mixed bag for me. I'm glad I watched some of them, and happy I saw all of them. But I won't go back to the majority of them. I honestly think my brother was right. When they were first released, they were spectacles. There was nothing else quite like them. But nowadays, they're not really as much. Especially when compared to the films that we've had long since. But hey, I thought it was a pretty good lineup, and I'd give it a 7 out of 10 overall. But truth be told, I am a lot more excited for what's next on my Disney marathon because I can tell it's going to be a real treat. But before I do, I should probably do that Ed, Edd and Eddy Season 2 ranking and maybe another video essay. Until then, I will see you guys later.